if I could come in on this point, you make the important point that at the time that the British came to Australia in 1788, the British were meticulous observers of international law. And under international law, a power, like the British or any other dominant power, could take territory. They could either conquer it or they could settle it. They would conquer it if there was an existing advanced civilization there, and the law was that only the law of the colonizing power necessary to the extent of the conduct of that territory would continue. The old law would continue alongside British law, which is the practice in colonies, for example, in India. The Indian colonies, for example, maintained their legal systems. The British brought a little bit of their law in, but they didn't change things fundamentally. But where they came to an area which did not have a state, there was no government there as such, there was no legal system which they could recognise, nobody they could really seriously deal with for a large area, they would settle that area. They didn't have the idea of terra nullius, which was introduced later. It's essentially in international law, it's a 20th century term. Yeah. The British never talked about terra nullius. But when you settled a place and you came in and you were accepted, you brought your law with you, and your law took over the whole area, and everybody there became a subject, like the white people. They became a subject of the British. They all became British subjects. Yeah. That essentially is what you're saying, is it not?
Oh, well, that's certainly true, and certainly true in a legal sense. The British did not find nations that, like international law said, that to be a sovereign power in a territory, you have to have the qualities of a nation. You have to have a central power. You have to have a established legal system and a whole range of other things. And the English said, well, we've looked at the Aboriginal tribes. They don't have leaders. They don't have any laws that we can understand. They did have some sort of religion, and the First Fleeters went to a great extent to try and work out from their culture, from their dances, from their conversations that they had with people about the nature of their religion. But after, I think, 48 years of settlement, when there was the New South Wales Supreme Court finally declared the point that you're making, that New South Wales was settled rather than invaded, and rather than conquered, that was a judgment by the New South Wales Supreme Court, which was preceded by 48 years of studying Aboriginal society and deciding that they did not have a nation status. And by then, the New South Wales Supreme Court had no reason to sort of fudge its decisions to suit the British, because conquest and the recognition of Aboriginal laws would have been a quite convenient way had the Aborigines been hostile and violent towards the whites, but they weren't, and they didn't have any reason, unlike in New Zealand, where the Maoris formed real warfare and had armies. The Aborigines never had armies. They had a few isolated people. In fact, most of the violence that did occur from Aborigines to white society was Aborigines who were out of the loop, who were not accepted within white society because they were distant and no one really knew they existed. But they wanted what the white people had. They wanted to get a regular food supply. They wanted to get hatchets to make cutting branches off trees and things more simple. They wanted what the whites had, and if they couldn't get that by reasons of their permanent association with the whites, which the majority of Aborigines originally did, then the outsiders would, in some cases, resort to violence and steal stuff from the whites and from white homesteads, not from governments or anything. the only violence that did occur was not because the Aborigines on the outside of the society wanted the whites to leave, which is what the academic historians have told us now for the past 30, 40 years. The Aborigines were upset about losing their territory. The violence was simply to get at the products that the white society offered without without having to form a permanent relationship. It was. They wanted what the whites had. They wanted the way of life that the whites provided. They didn't want to defend Aboriginal society. They didn't want the whites to go away. That's not what happened.